was going to introduce something about the keynote. We talked about it before, but then he told me I shouldn't, because it should be a surprise, and I shouldn't, spoil it. And so that's why I'm not going to say anything. And
where is the guy for the light? Because it was perfect before.
I'll find out.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay. So thanks for attending this really early keynote. So, and sorry for my French. So I cannot do otherwise. So this is like that. So after a moment, you will get used to it, and you will see, you can even understand. So I am a research director. I am head of a team of 7, and we have between 7 and 20 people. And I've wrote a lot of things, and I'm leading the Faro community, and I will talk a bit about that today. And I created a company that is called Synectic, which means finding solutions to problems in an innovative way. Apparently, this is in the dictionary. So if you check, yes, I work on 2 kinds of things, language design, object-oriented reflective language design and things like that, and analysis, program analysis, meta-modeling, visualization, test, all the software engineering part around code. So when I was thinking about this keynote, I started to have a really strange roadmap in mind. So you will see this is strange. So I want to talk a bit, I will start to talk a bit about biodiversity, because this is something that strikes me in our science. And I have some question about what is the value of what we are doing and how do we evaluate other things. So this is the part of the talk that is a bit boring, this is a keynote, so it should be entertaining, but a bit deep. So this is the boring part. And then after I will show you a bit what we are doing, the 2 platforms. And finally, I will talk about what we are doing as some example of research that we are doing in our team. So I like plants. If I would not have been computer science, I would have done something with plants. And this is something from an island. This is the Sokrota. This is an island in the... Yes, can you switch off the light, please? And if you look in biology, they use diversity to measure wealth of a system. And that's a really interesting measure. And you said, what? So if you look, they call an endemic species a species that you cannot find in another place in the world. And that's really interesting from that perspective. So, yes. This one too? Yeah, thanks. So if you look at this, I was reading a book on this island, Sokrota, and what you see there is that this little island has 700 endemic species. If you compare, you said, okay, what is the measure? If you compare to England, they have 47. And now the key question, which one will you would keep and preserve? I have my personal view on the problem as a French, But okay, even if you're not French, I think that you would keep Sokrota. Huh? Of course, I am French, so stories goes in the right direction, but still. So you see, so the point is, finally, in biology, we said, okay, there is a value to keep this stuff because the richness of the system, this is its diversity. And then when you look at computer science, and it's improved dramatically, but we still have a lot of work to do. This is why should we always do the stuff that everybody else does so that we are relevant? Just an example. In 2002, I was teaching JavaScript because I found that fun. And I said, you should learn a language that is different from class-based. It's instance-based. You have it in your web browser. But I was not cool because it was not the hype. In 2014, I do not teach JavaScript. And I'm still not cool. So there is a problem. Huh? So just for the record, back in 1998, In fact, you could nearly not do anything beside Java. This was the dogma. Oh, yes, you do that in what language? No, you should do it in Java. So let's introduce lambda expression in Java. Okay, it took 15 years to do that, but okay. Anyway, so you had workshop like that. So we, with Wolfgang Demeter, Theo, and Ole Madsen, we were so fed up that we decided that it was the end of Java for language engineering. So we did a workshop that was the object-oriented language engineering in post-Java area. We decided, let's stop now. It's over. And it's fun because when I was looking into Google about that, and what the system said, it says, Java also acted as a break, especially to academic language design research. The goal of this second edition of the workshop was to address object-oriented languages that diverge from Java doctrine, but support a much more dynamic way of constructing software. In the near future, this dynamicity will be required in order to construct software that is highly context-dependent due to the mobility, blah, 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 blah. And we are right in. So at the end, this workshop was turned into, it was a success. The first workshop, we got something like 50 participants. Then after, we turned it into DILA, which was held at Uppsala, and then it came DLS. So the point is, how did we succeed to escape COBOL? You can replace and you can put Java because Java is the new COBOL. But okay, how can we succeed to escape X at the end of the day? And the other question that I ask myself is how can we influence that the next language will exhibit different properties if we do not explore different approaches? That should be, it looks so obvious when you look at it like that, but people told me, no, what you are doing does not apply to X. Of course it does not apply to X. I don't want that it applies to X. Does it lower its value? No. And I like that. Your approach is interesting, but it does not apply to Java. That's my favorite feedback from papers. And I said, luckily. But often this is a wrong statement because the guy didn't understand. And you said, what? Where? How it could not apply to Java? Anyway. So I like this Calvin et Hobbes. And I think that we can do better. That's one of the parts. So remember, diversity in biology is really a nice property. We should have the same. And then the future will decide. Because often, as a software computer scientist, we judge. I know that in the next 15 years, it will be like that. Good luck. You are good. So then there is the next question. This is, how do we evaluate other researchers? You know, you are so good that you are in this committee and you will evaluate these other people. And, let's take some criteria. Notice that there is a guy running like a hamster in the loop, in the back. But this is a subliminal message for us. I got sick, so now I'm not an hamster anymore. So we count. So we count papers. Yes, how many papers that this guy has? And then papers. And then papers. Yeah. Oh, and also, yes, PC participation. And keynote. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks a lot. I appreciate, guys. And then also the boring admin aspect of life. You are not in the right board. You should be in the editing board, managing boring mails to people to manage things instead of doing research. That's really important for your career. Really. I got that feedback. I applied to ERC, and I got that feedback. I was not in enough boring boards. Yes, I know. So this cannot be the only measures, in fact. It cannot be. And this is our responsibility, because we judge people at the end, because we are part of the process. So I asked myself, how much is it to have an end user? A real end user. You know, not one of your students. A real one, a guy that you never met before, and that you will never met probably in all your life, that is using your stuff. Because those ones, we can find some of them, of our students. So how much is it? I don't have the answer, by the way. I just have the question. But I think that they are good questions to ask ourselves. And for example, I ask also myself, because at INRIA, I wanted to be promoted. And they told me, you publish too much. And I said, what? Ah, okay. So I had to explain why I was publishing too much. And I said, I'm not publishing that much because I'm writing even books, so I'm not publishing for my H-index because I cannot control this stuff. And when I write a book which takes 3 years to write, I'm not counting in terms of citation. Because that's the point, this is real people, they don't cite your work, they don't care, they do things with it. So for example, I wrote a book for kids how to program. I wrote 900 pages and then after I put 300 in this book and I throw away the rest because I didn't like it. And Faro, by example, this is for newbies. Newbies, they do not. So pay attention, books is not good for your CV. Don't do that. By the way, Matthew, I was thinking about you when I was writing those kinds of, because yes, I appreciate what you are doing with Racket and Dr. Scheme and things like that. So this is a parenthesis between us. And then I had the question because I created a company and then I asked INRIA, I said, but guys, when you evaluate me, how much is it a startup? Seriously. Because this is a lot of energy that you put in something to see if it works for real and things like that. So, okay, so you see, I just have the question, you have the answer, or you can ask yourself when you will judge the next people. And I could have done the same with paper reviews. When I was PhD students, there was a web page that says the 70 way of killing a paper, of rejecting a paper. So I'm not in this kind of mood. So, but pay attention. I think that we can also damage ourselves with these kinds of stuff. So now the fun. So AirMod, this is my team. This is called remodularization, and we remove everything that was too long. And that's why you have these two colors. So we are 7 people, permanent people, and some PhDs, postdocs, engineers from all over the world. By the way, we are hiring. It's a permanent research position, not linked with teaching loads. It's in French. We speak English in my team. The administration speaks English, but the life out there is French. So, but if you know people that are interested, we are looking for people in software engineering analysis, language design, virtual machine, these kinds of things. So what are we doing in my team? We have a part of it that is working on re-engineering. So this means that how do we maintain large legacy systems? And this is on that we created a company. And the other one, this is how could we make sure that we can build system that evolves? And I like a metaphor. When I try to explain to people, yesterday I wanted to change the clock on my iPhone. I tried to ring half an hour, and at the end I had to reboot. And I said, shit, we don't reboot human, we don't reboot plants. There is something fundamentally wrong in our industry. And I was thinking about this metaphor. Imagine that we would be in a polluted world. We are nearly there. But we are in a polluted world, and when you get baby, they put you something in your mouth to give you oxygen. And this stuff, when you are 80 and you die, should continue to work. It should update because it should grow, you should change. And imagine, sorry, we will reboot. Can you take your breath for a while? So why do we accept this from systems that we don't accept for the rest? I'm really amazed. And each time we send proposal on, yes, we should do code update and dynamic code update, people tell me, no, it's not a problem. The last time I installed I did increment, I'm really bad with software. I pressed the button, there was macOS 8, iOS 8 on my iPhone. I pressed the button, it crashed forever. It took me 3 months to recover this stuff. Because after I talked to Apple and they said, no, you should remove this stuff, and we remove it. And then I could redo the industrial, the original setup. Nothing. It was crashing every 2 seconds. I paid this device 500 euro, and it crashed systematically. How this is possible? And then I was thinking, oh, I'm really happy, I'm really happy that I don't rely on a computer science device to breathe. And I'm amazed at that. So it's like, when we will do something so that we can really have something like that. So from that perspective, what we are looking at what is a reflective system? Could we have something that automatically updates even when the system is updating itself, and I want to change the update loop and all these kinds of things. And then the other objective, this is, we want to create a Faro, and I will explain what is it, and an ecosystem. So if you look, that's a bit like that. We have these two platforms. So we have Moose. This is a platform for doing software engineering, software analysis. And we have Faro. And then we have all this. So yes, we don't care of that. I took the slide because they were fun. This is a friend of mine that did them. So, and what you see is that it's interact all the time. Things interact together. So this means that Moose is developed on top of Faro. We have people that are using Faro and Moose in 23 university research groups. They can influence Faro, send code, that influence them, and all this stuff. And for us, this is important because this platform represents the interaction that we have with the world and within our team. There is a missing arrow here. So what is Faro? So this is the lighthouse of Biarritz, by the way. Very nice place. So Faro, this is a Smalltalk-inspired system. It's a language plus an IDE. It's really powerful and elegant and fun to program. I will show you a bit that. There is a great community because we really want to build a community. And this is a living system, so we can script the system on the fly. So I want to share that with you. So when I said elegant, I want to prove it. So here, you have the full syntax of the system. So this is a slight variation from Smalltalk AT. You have the complete syntax. There is no other syntactic element that on this one page. Nothing else. You have method declaration, comment, annotation, variable definition, conditional that are just message, lambda expression, assignment, arrays, iteration, lambda expression, return. Everything that is in Faro is expressed with this one page of code. And I like that because we don't have to think too much about the syntax after that. And then the model. This is the complete model. It's dynamically typed. Everything is instance of a class. All the methods are public and virtual. The attributes are protected, and there is single inheritance. And we added threads in that, and I'm still not sure that this is a good idea. That's something else. Because, you see, this is not because we write a paper that we believe in the paper. I guess that it's happened to a lot of us, but for me, on those one, I'm not sure. We did that, but I'm not sure that I would redo it, and I would put threads. I have a love-hate affair with threads, so immersive, because this is a real system. You can have deep contact with objects. It's highly interactive and reflective and expectable. And I want to show you that this is a student. Each time the code gets blue, it is compiled. This is a student from Lugano that did that for a little competition. And I like the idea that you have this live aspect. So here, we could have anything like a web service, HTML request, GPU. So people are scripting GPU directly like that. And so, okay, you got it. Huh? And we have this interaction with the system. So nowadays, people think that live programming, and they said, no, this is not live programming, because live programming, you should be able to repeat the stuff. Basically, if you take the definition in live programming, they take a piece of code, and they repeat it. We cannot do that for real system, because we have in an imperative mode of execution. So we cannot repeat endlessly a program or a useful program. So our system is interactive and introspective, and that's interesting from that perspective. So what is interesting is that you can learn from the system. And for me, this is really a quality that is interesting because since this is a real system, it is complex, and they are still part of the system. I forgot to say that Faro was a fork from Squeak, so they are part that we are still understanding and things like that. I maintained Squeak during 4 years, and then after we decided that we have to go our own way. So for understanding from the system, what you can do, you can click on every element and get an inspector. An inspector, this is an object that you can go and check the value inside the other one. What I like more, this is that there is this tool where you give the argument, and you ask the system, given this argument, tell me what are the methods that would match, that would work. And I like that. So here on the slide, I said, oh, I want to, if I have the string AB and the string C, I want to have the strings ABC, and the system will tell you, oh, this is comma that is doing the concatenation. And what I wanted to show you, this is, I realized after a while that a lot of people don't understand what is object-oriented programming. They teach Java, but they don't reflect on what they are teaching. And the first lecture I give usually, when I give a lecture on advanced object-oriented programming, this is this one. I asked the guy, I said, how would you implement not? And not everybody should know. Huh? You have false, you send the message not, it returns true. You have not, you send a message true, you return false. And that's okay. How you would implement not? And I showed them, I said, you know, in Faro or Smalltalk in general, you let the receiver decide. So this means that what you will do is that you will, on the false class, you implement not that return true, and on the true class, you implement not that return false. And then usually I say to the people, okay, you don't care because this is a silly exercise because you will never implement true or false not in your life. But why do I ask this question? Because there is a really big implication behind this simple example. So I show how this is implemented, but message acts as case statement. The dot operation in Java, this is a choice operation. And the problem is that once you have the choice operator, you need to have choice. And what I show is that if I said how you would implement not in the class Boolean, you could not implement it like that because I would constrain your space. So what we can deduce from that is that there is a huge difference between this design, where you have one fat class, and a design like that where you have a hierarchy, because the hierarchy is in fact it represents the choices. So on one hand, you should have the choice operator, and on the other hand, you should have the choices, and they match. Like that, you can select something. And when I was learning Smalltalk and I saw the implementation of not, I was shocked. I said, oh, wow, that's so beautiful. This is so obvious that it should be like that because it means this behind the scene. And I think that many times, people are too syntactic. We don't teach that. We teach all kinds of things, but we don't teach dot is a choice operator, stop to do if, then else, everywhere. I was looking at the curriculum, sometimes what people teach in the first year. We should really push people to teach the right object-oriented model. So just something, because sometimes when you do something, people get it completely wrong. So I want to explain you why we are doing Faro, because this is not for the fame. So there should be a reason. So our objective, this is to build a powerful engine so that we can reinvent our future. And what I mean here is that, for example, in 2005, something like that, there was a guy that developed Seaside, and Seaside was called the web framework for the heretics. So this means that it took the counter path to rest, even if you can do rest with Seaside, it took the counter way. And that was really interesting. And then this was a guy that was knowing Ruby, Objective-C, Scheme, Python, C, Java, and I asked him, why do you do it in Squeak at that time? And he told me, because I can manipulate the stack. And in fact, he knew that in Scheme he can do continuation-based web server, and in Objective-C, in WebObject, he can do kind of component model. And he mixed the two together. And this is this kind of innovation that we are interested in. This is, can we have a system where we can really rethink and propose a clever solution? So, and beside that, we do Faro because we want to create an ecosystem. And by ecosystem, what I mean teachers. So Faro is used in all kinds of universities in the world, research groups, and companies. Because I want that people, I think that this is very important, that people can make business with the system because it has good value for everybody. For example, there is one company that gave us the complete HTTP server because they have servers to track trucks. And they said, your HTTP server sucks. Do you want our brand new one that is fully tested, optimized? We said, oh, yes, and they gave us that. So there is a good, they know that we use that in production. They use that also. So from that perspective, if we look, the Faro of these companies, there are many of them that are doing web application with Faro, even in the world of JavaScript nowadays. And the Faro web stack is quite good. So we have different web front end or application, web application system, all the low-level details, meta modeling, all kinds of protocol and things like that, so, and database. I just wanted to show you two. So if you go on the Faro website, there are success stories because this is always difficult to sell what you are doing. And in fact, I'm not selling what I'm doing, I'm selling what they are doing. But if you go, this is fun. I asked the guy, tell me what you are doing with our systems. And yes, we hired this guy after, and he told us, oh yes, I made this shop that you can deploy shops so that in 10 minutes you can have your own shop. And he developed that alone, the complete things in 5 months. And I was like, wow, you did that in 5 months? And I met this guy in a Czech bank, and I could not understand, in fact. Because this guy told me, you know, my boss wants to have an innovative system with to track, to send push things to client about the stock options, blah, blah, blah. I don't know exactly what is it. And the guy told me, oh, you know, I developed it in 3 months alone. And in fact, when they ask the organization how much it would cost in terms of development, they got something like 2 years in Java, 1.5 years in C#. So imagine that they were cheating, because they were cheating. So imagine that they were cheating by 2 years, so by 2. It's already 1 year compared to 3. And I was surprised. I said, wow. Well, okay, they were cheating by 4. So this is still twice faster. So maybe this is because this is over-engineered. And I said, I don't understand why this is possible that you have a so big difference between the two things. And when this guy bring me back to the airport, he told me, oh, by the way, it was my first Faro application or Smalltalk application. I always wanted to do one, so I got the opportunity, so I did one. So probably this is a smart guy. But it was fun. You know, I don't understand how this was done. And this one is interesting because this is geometry for kids that is running on the 101 laptop per child and on all kinds of platforms. And so for us, Faro is a vehicle. It's not the goal. This is what supports us to do the next things. And from that perspective, I always say to the guys, you know, it's like we are in the bus, in a big bus, and we go south. And when we arrive to the south, it should not be a bus anymore. It should be a flying, I don't know what, with big turbines. But we cannot say to the guys, let's stop and come back in 10 years from now, we will have fixed it. So we are changing it while the bus is running. And every day we improve it. So in average, we have something, per release, we have something like 70 committers. And the regular one, that should be around 30, and we try to manage all that stuff with all the bugs and things like that. By the way, if you teach software engineering, I can tell you that we are pretty bad to teach how to report bugs. It's like that. When you see how people report bugs, and you crawl bugs. So the other point is that when I do a Faro presentation, I said Faro is yours in the sense that you can get an impact on it, you can steal it, run away with it, you can participate, it's fun. And we have people like that are really good that come and said, okay, if this guy would like to find a job, we would hire him automatically because you have a really excellent guy, and said, why this guy is coming, we don't know. But they made real contribution, and this is really fun. You can even learn from these people. So for us, we feel more responsible that the system is running because we have companies that are using it than doing it because this is cool and like that we will be famous. That's not our position. So what we did is that we created an industrial consortium with the idea that we should put in place the structure so that people can help themselves and put money on the table so that they can make sure that if we disappear tomorrow, the system can continue without us. And this is communication, a bit of communication and a bit more. And we have all these people that are putting money on the table and institute, and I thank them because this is cool. So I wanted to share this quote with you. I never met this guy. It's a software electrical engineer, and he was refactoring the delay class. So the delay class, for the one that know a bit a runtime system, this is the class that is used for doing all the scheduling. So this means that if you crash this one, the system will not work at all. And I was really, he did a really nice refactoring so that we could test the delay because the design was a bit strange. And he wrote that, and I said, wow, that's really cool. And this is what I was saying about the enabler. This was what Avi Bryant was saying about why he was choosing Squeak, because he could go really down to change the stack on the fly and do these kinds of things. I will talk a bit about that later after. So this is the same lighthouse here. South of France, west of France. So that was for the Faro, and then Moose. I want to show you a bit what people are doing in Moose, because again, this is a platform. So Moose, this is a community work. You have mainly Hermod and software composition group. You have the Glamorous team, and also a team that is, I forgot to put it here, the Object Profile, which is a company in Chile that is doing ROASAL. And I will show you a bit what is it. A bit of context. Okay, software is complex. I mean, real software, and talk about millions lines of code of things. And what is important to understand is that software is a living entity. I think that we still, as a community and people, do not understand what is software. In average, the lifetime is 20 years for a software system. I was working for an insurance company with a language that when you type it in Google, it does not show up. There is no BNF. You have to take the doc and say, oops, that's the doc. Aha. And it was running the complete business of this big insurance company in Belgium. And they are 2/3 of that code in their system. So what is really interesting is that often the decision they were, oh, there is a mouse. Early decision, in fact, people take decision, and this is not that their decisions were wrong. This is that the world changed. And for the people, like, if you are with my age, maybe this is bad, but you understand what is SimCity at that time. And SimCity is really interesting because if you play SimCity, the people are never happy. They all want something different. You start because you said, yes, I will put nice garden and things like that. And they want a job, and you put factories, and then you need to put roads. And it's never-ending story. That's the key point. So that's why I like this SimCity metaphor, because just to tell you a real joke, once we were working with a big German company that has 60% of the world market on a mail sorting system. And all the developer left, because if they would drive 15 kilometers, they would multiply their salary by 2 or 3. And then there was no documentation, nothing. Yes, once there was a comment, so I asked the guy before he left, he told me, oh, this is an obsolete comment, we should remove it. Good. And I asked the last guy of this project, and I said, how do you invest? Because, we are researchers, so we can fail, but this is your business, you do it. And he said, yes, I talked to my manager, and the manager said that there is no problem, it is our system. We own it. And I said, how this is possible that managers do not understand that if you have a dry geranium on your balcony, you own it, but it will never bloom again. This is exactly the same. So this means what we get there is that technology, customer, people change, everything change all the time. And we are still not focusing a lot on this part. So this is the context of Moose. This is what can we do? And something very interesting is that we only maintain useful software system. Because the non-useful one, we remove them. We maintain the one that make money. And now, so this data is probably, we should take it with the right level of scientific approach. But in essence, what it says that 80% of the total cost of a project is spent in maintenance. And then when you look at what the people call maintenance, they said 20% bug fix, 20% adaptation, and 60% perfective. So it means changing to adapt to the world. So what you see is that 80% of the cost of a project is adapting to new requirements. And then what is really interesting, this study, 80%, when you look at this 80%, how do they spend? You have more than half of this 80% that is spent in trying to understand the software system. So when we talk about millions dollars, then it means that you have half of them that are there. Oops, sorry. So what we are doing in this context at Hermod, we work on all the life cycle. So this is, you have code that is a bit strange, you have to represent it, or not only code, you have to do reverse engineering, you can do analysis, you can do transformation, refactorings, and things like that. And then, luckily, after you have better code, and you can also study the evolution. So we work on all this life cycle over the year. So you see, so how do we model things, meta-modeling, and things like that. How do we reverse engineer? What is the visualization? What it would mean? What are the good properties? What kind of analysis? Can we believe in software metrics? No. What are quality models? Do they work? All these kind of things. We work also in language independent refactorings and then evolution. So I will show you some of them at the end. So for that we have Moose. So Moose, basically, this is a platform. You take some slanted code, strange code, you represent it inside, and then you can do all kinds of things. You can compute metrics, do some visualization. I will show you that. Build tools, and I will show you that this is the part that is interesting for us. This is the things that we don't know. So let's just check that. This picture is nice. This is one of the first computers. And you know what was nice in this picture is that the cables are the programs. So when you have a bug, you move one cable from one hole to the other one. That's cool, because you could have physical programs. We don't have physical programs anymore. I don't know how many million lines of code were used to build the software that is in my machine. So after, this is fun. So we work on visualization. So people often said, yes, a picture tells 1,000 words. It depends. Not all the picture, I would say, tells 1,000 words. So we were working on that. So this is really old things. Here, for example, you have a hierarchy, and you try to get an idea of the hierarchy. So the size, this is the width, this is the number of attributes. The height, this is the number of methods, and the color, this is the lines of code. Just to get an idea of your system, is it flat, big? Why do I have not a hierarchy? So And then after we work also on, okay, how can we understand the class? So here you have, for example, a class with some methods and call graphs and instance variable access. Well, that's old. What is more interesting, this is the three dots in the picture. And this is what we are selling in our company. This is the idea is that we take data, we model the data. So data that can be log, that can be people and software. We will model it. And then for a given problem, we will either have an analysis that is ready, or we will develop an analysis and we will iterate. And what is important is this back arrow here. I think that is the most important one. This is that we annotate the models, we enrich the model with the result of the analysis up until we arrive to take a decision. And for example, this loop, we did this loop with Siemens to analyze a big, to provide them tools so that they can analyze a big C++ project. It takes 3 months to understand really, when you have methods that are really, really long, you can open them in Eclipse and try to understand them. So what is really the things that can help people, how they can query a large systems and things like that. And not something that we will write in the paper, but that people could really use for real. And the loop takes us 3 months in average to do a new tool. And this is what we call dedicated tools. So just to tell you, to give you an example, so this is just an example of visualization. At some point we ask ourselves, who is behind package X? This is like who is the soldier Brian, that's the same. So what we do is that we create a model to represent the entity, something that we extract from SVN, CVS, whatever. Now the hype is Git, so we should write Git because else, until the new hype. And then we build analysis to know who wrote the code. So if I have a problem, what is the guy that I should contact and how should I identify this guy? And then after we have this distribution map. So the idea is that the big square represents the package, the little square, the classes, and the color, the author. And here what you see is that blue work alone, yellow was working in different places, and then you have GBoss in one page. And of course there is a bit more than that, because we have some serialization, dendrogram, blah, 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 to put the color in the right place and to get the maximum feeling of the visualization. But what you see at the end is that if Cyan leave the company, they have a problem. Orange also. So this was one example where I wanted to show you really compactly, okay, this is the problem, and how do we do that? So what I was saying is that Moose, we are interested into these 3 dots because this is the stuff that we don't know how to do. And for that, in fact, Moose, this is not just a platform, this is an ecosystem of tools that can be used in isolation or not. So what we have Petit Parser, which is a modular pack, I don't remember, Packrat, parser, developed at a software composition group. We have Glamour, that is something to build tools with a component model, with ports and things like that. So here the idea was of Doru. So this is Doru Girba that did Glamour. And he said, if building a tool would be so cheap that you could build a tool between the moment where you said, oh, it's time to go to lunch, and where you go really to lunch, then you win something. And because you could throw away the tools. So Glamour, the pitch was build your own browser, your own tool in 10 minutes. And you have Roasal. I will show you some visualization of Roasal, which is a visualization engine. What I like, so I really like the idea, even if this is not mine. So the idea behind Roasal, this is if you want to be expert in visualization, don't write visualization, write a visualization engine. Like that, you will be able to exercise. And the point is again the same. This is, can we do a visualization so cheap that we don't care, we can explore, and we can throw it away if we don't like it. So And Moose in itself, it's a metamodel stack where we have FAMX, which is a kind of a stupid structural metamodel, but we have a lot of families of metamodel inside, and we have FAME, which is our reaction against MOF. Because MOF was far too complex, we said, come on. When UML2 get out, we said, let's stop, do something else. Do something that we can control, because we implemented the spec, and I implemented the spec in XMI, for example, and then you realize that they lied. Because XMI, they said, if you implement the stuff, you will have interoperability. No, XMI, this is just, you can save your model and you can load your model with the same version of your tool, period. So I implemented the XMI rules, and then you read the spec, and they are bogus. So nobody implemented that stuff before? No, apparently. So after a while, I said, okay, let's spend my time in good engineering, so let's do something else. So at Bern, they designed it FAME, and then we will revisit it because we are not really happy, and this is not saved in XML because we were fed up also to fill up our disk with XML. So we use a kind of Lisp syntax, and it is working well. So I just wanted to show you Mondrian. So the idea is that with Mondrian Roasal, so Mondrian is a DSL and Roasal, this is a new one. What you see on the screen, in fact, this is the result of a script. And normally I have a video. So I wanted to thank, Alex is not here, but because they put a lot of energy in that, and we are really heavy users of that. There is a nice community of people doing this is too small. Oh, okay. I ask people to do video with larger font, but this is, do you see something? Okay, we will. So basically, he's writing code here, and that's why. So let's wait a bit, you will see it appear. So in fact, he's drawing little dots, because he said, oh, I want Eclipse on the, I want 100 little Eclipse on the 2C-bit the visualization, and then so normally maybe you see now you have, they are a bit larger. And then incrementally, in fact, what is interesting to me is that incrementally is building his visualization, and this is the process that we use. We don't do it for the same, but this is the process we use when we develop visualization, even inside the company. So, and there is a library where you can define the layout, and you script basically your visualization. And a visualization, a complex one, this one is in 2 minutes, so a complex one can be one afternoon. And then with these kinds of things, I use this one, they published this one on so here the idea was, how can you do a user interface so that you can query a meta model and let the user select what he wants to see inside? And what are the, so it was an experience that they did to, because we had and we were scripting the visualization. Now you query by interaction the visualization. So here you have classes, and inside the or packages, and inside you can zoom and see things. So this is the kind of things that we. Now I wanted to show you the kind of gift that we can get from a community. The first one is, you will see. I have always to press twice. This is very strange. So where is Andrei? Yes. So Andrei, the guy there in the corner, is doing a demo because we cannot see it well. But the idea is that this is in Moose. They are building experiment of the first one that I show you. This is how can we query the system? How can we query and navigate the system in a way that this is consistent, coherent, and that you have only one way to query the system? There was the poster, and can you do a demo? So, for example, you can query a class, navigate inside. You can also imagine if you want to see, I would like to know all the methods in the system that call the same, that call two methods. How do you do it nowadays in your IDE? Then you do to query by hand, and then you look at them. So all these kinds of things. And you can query, for example, your file system if you want, and if you get a zip, you can navigate inside. And the point is to do it in a way that can be extended. So they did that. It was integrated into Spotter, into Faro, and now people are complaining because they say, no, it should work all the time because I cannot live without this system. So it was nice. And then there is another video that they did, and I like that they did. So you will see this is a bit too fast, but this was fun. Épique. C'est épique. The idea there, this is that you should be able to control how the object that you manipulate can be displayed or morphed. And the point is I think that the idea is very simple, is that you can specify for every object the way the different facets, the way you can interact with your object. And they did the GT inspector, and you can ask Andrei for a demo. It's very nice. And the community really took that, and I don't know, in 2 weeks we got something like 100 extensions in the system. What struck me the most is that I work with Marcus Denker, which is the guy doing the compiler behind Faro, and he's not a graphical guy at all, by all means. And what was amazing to me is that Marcus is dealing with bytecodes, with abstract syntax tree, and then when he saw the tool, he started to build the extension for the inspector so that he could see when I click on this node in the IR, in the intermediate representation, I can jump into the code, or I can jump into the bytecode. I can navigate all these things. So for example, the compile methods, before we were just showing them like source or bytecode, and now we have the tree. We can navigate the tree, we can navigate the source, we can navigate the bytecode, the intermediate representation, and all this stuff. And I was really surprised that, you know, for a guy that never wanted to do any user interface, he has this pressure to say, oh yes, I will do it because I need that. And this is not my work, this is their work, and this is really nice. This is part of this idea that comes from the software composition group of this modable object, modable tools. So this means that not all the same tools should be able for the same task. And we should be able to change the tool so that they adapt to the task that we are doing. And it should be cheap to do that. Okay, so now I want to show you a bit what we are doing at Hermod. And you know, some people, sometimes they take it completely wrong. We are not, Faro is not our research. Faro is just a vehicle. We do it because we like that, but most of the time what we do not go into Faro because it is far off. For example, we had one PhD that was working on making all the reference into of the system first-class object, like transparent proxies so that we can do things behind your back. for security reasons and things like that. We will never push that into Faro because it is used in production. So what I want to show you what we did around changes. This is just a small part, but I like that. This is 3 PhDs. The one of Veronica Uquilas Gomez, it was a co-tutelle with the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, the PROC group, and we had a lot of fun. One with Martin Diaz, that is in our group, and André Ora, and I will show you a bit. So the point with Veronica was, if we take forks, because now we have Git, or back then we already have Git, so you have Git, and everybody forks and branch. Oh, that's wonderful, I branch all the time, and I feel so empowered because I can branch. And then, how do you merge? Because branching, this is the easy part, but this is merging that is interesting. So this means that now, in this branch, maybe if I take this guy, I should take also this one, because in my commits, there is a dependency, but the dependency is completely hidden. And in Faro, I am often looking at the change that people are doing. And sometimes the guy will change one line somewhere and you said, wow, what is the effect on that on the system? You know, changing a nil by error, by signaling an error. Wow. How can I know that? Those kinds of things. So this means that what Veronica did, she did 2 kinds of things. The first one was, can we characterize a change? Because you send a change, you have this diff whatever, and I don't know what is inside. So she did a visualization, in fact several of them. She did a visualization. Here, for example, the change touches 5 packages, it touches 9 classes, and then I can hover it and see, okay, what has been changed and replaced within the context, and then I see also the inheritance. Oh, okay, that's a big package, and the guy changed the root of the inheritance. Oops. Maybe I should pay attention because you see those kinds of things. So first, characterizing changes, and second, characterizing the dependency within a stream, within a sequence of commits. If I take this commit, for example, here, if I want the commit, the yellow commit, then I will have to take this one and this one. And the point there, this is what we want to do. This is, I want to be able to navigate in the past and the future of the commit. Because I would like to know, oh, this guy changed his methods. And in his next version, or in the 200 or 300 versions later, did he use this method or not within this context? So basically, what is not clear, but this is that here we could navigate different branches and senders and implementers inside these branches and get also the dependency between them so that we could take a decision and say, show me if I integrate that, what are the other things that I should integrate and how these things are used inside the branch. And I think that we will see these kinds of features arriving in Git. Because for the moment, what Git show you, this is really stupid things. Yes, you committed a lot this week. Good. But as a developer, I don't care of that. I care. Help me to integrate this change and to understand it. And you see this project, this PhD, I proposed it because every night or every evening, I'm integrating changes. And I said, we are still in prehistorical ages from that perspective. There is not that much things that can help me to do the job, so besides reading code. And that was a fun PhD. And then now Martin is working on, you have a coding session, and then you implement things, and then in the middle you fix a bug. How can you decompose the commits before sending them to a repository? And again, there this is, when you commit, this is too late. This is, can we analyze your activities as a developer so that we can decompose your commits? There are several works that are doing that. So the question there was, what are the real criteria that we should use so that we can decompose commits? And they came up with a list of properties, run experiment with real developer to identify the ones that were interesting. This has been published to SANER this year. And you see, so yes, the idea is really what are the criteria that we should monitor so that we get the best separation so that when we do the commits. And Martin did the complete infrastructure to monitor the change. So in Faro and Squeak in the past, there is this kind of tape that each time you do something, this is registered, but it was a bit old. So we have a brand new system to monitor what everybody is doing at different level of abstraction. So we can replay refactoring by extension or by intention or all these kinds of things. So there is a monitoring system behind the scene that helps us to do that. Then André Ora did a PhD on when we have system-specific rules, because you have normal rules and then you have system-specific rules, are they worth compared to the price to capture them? So he did all kinds of analysis to compare if a rule captured well a bug, when the bug was fixed and things like that. And the part that I like in his PhD, this is this one. So the idea, what he did is that he used the developer activity and he monitored what we are doing to propose and to create automatic rules that we will apply to migrate the system. So for example, we play the game as Faro engineers. If a guy would come to me and said, Stefan, what are the methods that you change and that people should not use or that are not deprecated, because there is a difference between deprecation and not using the right interface. I would come up with a list like that, random list, because just what I remember. And he ran his tool on our system, and then I could see and said, oh, yes, that's true. We should not do it like that. We should not do it like that. We should not do it like that. So he had something like 6% false positive, which was good. And what was interesting is that after we can ship these rules to people to help them to migrate from one version of Faro to the other version. And in fact, what we should do is that we realized that we were not consistent in our system itself. Because at some point, you start to have to follow a policy, but you don't have a rule that enforces it. So suddenly, one guy do a commit that revert, or not revert, but that violate what you were thinking before, and identify those rules. This is not something that you do because normally we are completely in the flow of developing. So what I like really in this idea was to use our activity, the commits, to build the knowledge about our own activity. And I said, oh yes, that's nice. And when we did the experience, we got really two different cases. One that was perfect. You could migrate a system in 1 hour by executing the rules, because the rule said, you are calling this API, do you want to call this one? You said, do you want that I refactor the code? Yes, and it works. Or you have the system where you use too much inheritance and the rules, they do not work. So we said, okay, that was fun. We had black and white results. So this means that there is certainly something else to do there. But I really like this idea. So now I want to show you when we have a Faro end user, the Faro end user has really amazing expectation on the system. And what does it mean on the problems that we face after? So I like reflective programming, so I understand a bit what they want, but when you are on the other side, this is also a bit costly. So we want incremental recompilation, dynamic class shape changing. So this means that each time an instance migration. So what does it mean? It means that I am programming my little class, and I add an instance variable, and I compile the class. Boom. The class should be migrated because maybe you change the offset and things like that. And we are in an interactive mode when we are developing. So this means that the instance that would refer to the class before you add this new instance variable, they have to migrate it. You know, this is like Mr. Toyota that called back the car and said, we need to change that. Faro is doing that all the time. Each time you change a class, all the instances from this class, they have to be callback, change, mutated on the fly without you knowing it, so that you get the feel that, in fact, you are modifying the same class. But behind the scene, you are not modifying the same class. We create a new class on the fly. We compile everything to the new one. We throw away the old one. We migrate the instances and things like that. But from the end user perspective, you want that because this is really cool. You didn't even see that this is like that. You want debugger support because I want to code in the debugger on the fly. I want recompilation also. So for the web application part, you want stack verification because this is cool, but you don't want it all the time because this is costly. So you see, so when I talk about on-the-fly recompilation, this is a typical interaction. You are in TDD, so you write your code, you do your assertion, blah, blah, blah. You run the test. The method is not found because you never implemented it, so the system barks and said, ooh, there is no methods. So the system asks, do you want that I create a method for you? You said, oh, yes, of course, please. It will create on the fly a method, but this is a special method. This is a method that will raise an error. Then the system relaunched this execution and said, okay, new methods, please restart. So the method restarts and said, okay, anyway, I will raise an error because there is nothing new. It's open a debugger. You hack in the debugger and said, yes, I know the definition of the method. You recompile on the fly the methods, and you do proceed. This is the kind of interaction. When we program in Pharo, we are always doing that because we are too lazy to think upfront our methods because maybe we will be wrong. So what you do, in a typical TDD session, this is what you do. You just said, go ahead, boom, we will code in the debugger fast. And this interaction loop can last, I don't know, 5 seconds. So how do we, behind the scene, we should support that. So what I was saying is that the stack execution in Pharo, when Pharo execute, this is a C stack. But when you introspect the stack, this is a real object. And this is a Smalltalk object that when you cut the stack, you have an impact on the C stack. So this is a bit tricky, this part. But this is really important for us for debugger, advanced debugging, continuation. Because at the end, you can implement continuation. They are implemented like that in Pharo. I just want to show you this because this is fun. This context. So this context, this is the traditional Smalltalk system that represent an object that represent the stack, the method execution. So with that, you can do the debugger support. All the exception handling is based on this. And once we got a problem, 5, maybe 8 years ago, we were thinking, oh yes, if we put print everywhere, we will die. Because if we put print in these methods, we will fill up our disk of print statement. What we would like to have, we would like to have a method that only stop, please only stop, if you are invoked from the test bar methods. How do we express these kinds of things? Because now in this code, I want foo not to stop, and if I execute test bar, I should stop. How this is implemented? This is 5 lines, a bit more of code, because before we were doing print, and we said, no, it does not scale, we will die if we do that. And Marcus implemented this very nice one. So how does it work? Alt if is verifying the stack, and there is a while that says, if you are on the top of the stack, then you are over. Else, go up one element of the stack at a time. And if the selector, this means the call that is on the stack, is the one that you want, you raise an error. You raise a signal of the alt that will be opening the debugger. Else, you continue. And with these 8 lines, we have this conditional alt system that is based on the Cflow. And that's cool. I was like, wow, yes. So in the language, we have also object swapping. So we can say all the pointers that are pointing to one object should point to another one, and this atomically. And like that, we can do things behind the scene. So So you see, so for example, here I have a point, another point that point to the same one, and a third one, and then when I change the 2 points, then you don't care. I guarantee that all the pointers are changed, so we can do like that. We can mutate things in the back. Normally, normal people should not use Become, but the tools they need that. So with that context in mind, then we ask ourselves those kinds of questions, and there are some PhDs. So this is, how do we bootstrap a reflective system? And what is the infrastructure so that we can bootstrap it? Because we would like to be able to express the system in itself. How can we update the system while the system is running? Because I will show you, when we mutate, for example, the hash of the dictionaries, the system is running, and still we need to change the hashes because we want to have better property for hashes and things like that. One of the points was also in the same style. This is the execution model. Pharo, and as any Smalltalk, has the notion of image. The image is a cache. You have all your objects. You can save them to the disk. This is like a virtualization, in fact. What we have now with Parallel, this is exactly the same that what we have in a Smalltalk system. So you can dump the memory and restart the memory because you will have the methods and things like that. So how can we debug those kinds of things? We were also working on, we would like to have isolation in this system. So how can I isolate a system that by nature is reflective and can escape? Because reflection, this is the idea that you should be able to reflect on your own computation. So how can I put back a kind of security or isolation concern to guarantee that, for example, this part of the system should not be able to access this part of the system because on a server we would like to have separate memory. And we were also thinking of what is the reflective representation of the system that you have, for example, that you want to have if you want to do remote debugging. Okay, I deploy this application in the cloud. Now I would like to have my debugger live there. Or I deploy the application, my application on a small system. And what is the meta representation that I need on the system so that I can debug it? Or how can I inject that? And we work also on JIT. I will show you some of those. So this is the work of Guillermo that is here. He will present that at Onwards. And the question that we asked when we started this is how, because Pharo comes from Squeak and they lost the bootstrap of the system. In fact, Smalltalk evolves over time because they were, basically what they were doing is that they pass a function on all the objects of the system and they recreate this binary format. And I believe that this is not the right way to do things. I want to have a real bootstrap where I can step-by-step reconstruct a kernel because it has good software engineering properties. You know, okay, I rebuild it. Every time I rebuild it from scratch. But we don't want to do the bootstrap in C because if you look at Ruby, this is what they are doing. We want to do the bootstrap in our lovely language because else what's the point? And because I don't want to maintain C code anyway, So the other question that we ask ourselves, this is, if you take an application, it's too fat in general. So how can we create a customized kernel or customized application that only get what is needed? And related to that, this was also, how can we update the core of the system while the system is running? So just to give you, so a bootstrap, basically you have a language description that goes via the bootstrap. Once executed, will create the runtime of your system. So that's a basic bootstrap. So you have, and what we want is that we want that this system is reflective. So in essence, a bootstrap is not really complex to write. It will take you some time to get it right, especially ObjLisp, you have two classes, and ObjLisp, this is trivial, but a real language, Pharo, should have in the core of the system should have something like 80 classes because the meta class refer to the array, refer to string. String is a class, so it is an instance of the meta class and all the meta circular dependencies. But once there are techniques to do that, once we can do that, the point is, okay, I express this bootstrap, now how do I execute it? Because to execute it, I need to have something that can run, so can I execute it in another system or things like that? I will show you after. So on the same kind of idea, we were saying we were really going to how could we make sure that we can create a minimal system based just on the execution? And again, this is I run that. What do I do? Where do I save the things? And those kinds of things. And what I was saying, this is we got, for example, you have the system that is running, and how do we integrate the delay refactoring? What we do right now is that we have to prepare to think that, yes, if I change this stuff, it will change that. So now I will prepare these things so that in the 3 next integration change that I will integrate, it makes sure that the system will work. And then after, I will remove sometimes the placeholder that I put in place. So sometimes to introduce a change in the living system that is running, it can take you 6 change that you put in sequence, and it can be really, and then we were thinking, how could we do that differently? Because this is not the right, it feels a bit ad hoc. So what Guillermo proposed, this is, in fact, the virtual machine will have 2 kernels side by side, and 1 kernel that is really empty. When I mean really empty, there is not even true or nil in this kernel. Because nil would mean that you have, or true would mean that you have another class true. And, oh, if I have another class true, it means that it would be bootstrap and things like that. So we have a virtual machine that will have these 2 kernels side by side, and one that will control the other one. And so we have a kind of virtualized application and the hypervisor. And the virtualized application can ask information to the hypervisor. And like that, we can do the bootstrap. So this means that from this, we can interpret the information and we can build in this world the new kernel. With the same idea, what we did to tailor application is that we use an empty kernel where there is nothing. And we run the system, it fails because there is nothing. And each time it goes and asks the mother, okay, I need this, and restart the computation. And with that, we got, for example, an image that is doing the addition of 2 numbers. This is 11K. Factorial plus IO 89K. A real small web application, half of a mega. And the idea is that we go run, collect, fail, run, collect, fail, up until we stabilize. And for that, you need in fact, at the end, what you have a meta, you have an interface or a mop for what is a runtime. So I will just say a word on that. We are working on how can we save the JIT optimization so that at startup we don't have to rewarm again the system. So this is the PhD of Clément Bérat. And this is quite nice. We expect to have some speed up with that. So I should finish. So I will skip that. I will finish here. Okay, I want to thank all the contributors because I could not do this presentation without all the people that contributed. I'm probably missing some people because I could not find their picture on the web. So I hope that you enjoy this wonderful keynote. And yes, yes.